Hello, I'm Henry Bonsu and this is Doubling Down, where we tackle a topic that's blazing a trail on social media and beyond. Joining me today are the cultural critic, Father Frank Gelly, the journalist and political analyst, Hafsa Karim Mustafa, and the journalist and PR consultant, Tete Kofi. Welcome to all of you. Very nice to see you.
It's a pleasure.
No, I mean, it really is nice to see you. Now, for centuries, it was Europe's dominant religion, a mighty force with power over kings and queens, governments, institutions, and millions of ordinary people. But following the Irish referendum on abortion, the Catholic Church is looking like a shadow of its former self. In Spain, only 1 in 5 Catholics attend Mass. In France, it's just 1 in 10. In Germany, donations to the Church are significantly down. Only in Poland, where attendance is still high, does the Catholic Church retain its influence in most areas of life. Many analysts say the Catholic Church's hold on people has diminished through largely self-inflicted wounds. A reluctance to move with the times on matters like abortion and women priests, but also the global sexual abuse scandals that have rocked the institution to its core. Commentators argue that Pope Francis, who ironically will visit Ireland later this year, has abandoned Europe for more fertile territory in Africa and Latin America. It leaves the Catholic Church and its supporters with serious questions about its future in an increasingly multi-ethnic, multi-faith and secular continent. So will it resist the tide by sticking to its principles or try to adapt to modern trends like some Protestant churches? Let's get some early thoughts. What was your initial reaction to this Irish vote? Frank?
I was not surprised because it was on the cards. It certainly underlies the tremendous change which has befallen Ireland, which was a bulwark of Catholicism, which has now departed from the traditional teaching of the Catholic Church.
Were you dismayed by what you saw?
Well, I want to say that as an Anglican priest, I want to speak the voice of the voiceless. I want to say that the the unborn babies who will be aborted as a result of this change have no voice. And they're weak, they're vulnerable, nobody will defend them, but I will. So in this sense, I want to nail my colours to the mast.
But of course, there were many, many women in that country who said they were voices. They, the living, were voices. Hafsa, what did you think when you saw what was going on there?
Well, for one thing, I think following the gay marriage vote, I think it seemed very obvious that Ireland was heading to a new direction. I think when it comes to abortion, it's a very complex situation, but I think in modern times, in particular in the aftermath of the mother who died as a result of a pregnancy that was very detrimental to her health, it was going to be a shifting moment in Irish history, and therefore I wasn't remotely surprised by the result, no.
Tete, what did you think?
What got me was the number of younger voters who actually registered so they could participate in this referendum. And for me, again, as Father Gelly has said, the fact that Ireland, the former bulwark, the former rock of the Catholic Church...
It really was a barometer, wasn't it, of the health of the church?
Totally. For me, it spoke very loudly about the fact that A, the world itself is changing, and B, the gauntlet is being thrown down to all religious faiths as to how are you going to respond to the will of these very loudly spoken people.
Father Frank, are you prepared to pick up the gauntlet? And if so, what will you do with it?
Oh, absolutely. And I want to say, yes, the case which has been made much of a woman who lost her life because abortion wasn't allowed. But again, you got to weigh that one on the many unborn children who will lose their lives because of this new law.
Well, people can't see those unborn children, they don't feel them, whereas a real live mother who was going to give birth.
But the life which is coming towards us has as much right to exist as the life which already exists, because the fetus already at an early stage has its own circulation system and its own pattern of brain activity. It has all the elements of a life. And we know that when we see ladies with a baby on board sign, it indicates that there's something alive.
What do you think, Hafsa?
I'm not really of that view. I mean, I'm of the view that in certain circumstances, abortion, it has to be a right. For one thing, a victim of rape, a victim of incest, and of course, when it comes to the health of the mother, I think that will always trump the health of the unborn child.
As we saw in that particular case. didn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, for me, there is no happier event than the birth of a child. A child is a human life. It must be respected. But we must also recognise that we are going through a time of changes, a time in which women's voices are being heard louder and louder.
Hashtag time's up, you know?
Exactly. And so one gets the impression that at this time, women are saying, hang on, we're the bearers of children. Let us have our say on this matter. And again, that is another event which has shown that times have changed, and the church, religious institutions, social philosophies, everybody has to pay attention and listen.
Well, we've been talking about abortion, but that was just an indicator of where the Republic of Ireland is going. So, in headline terms, the Irish voted to repeal the 8th Amendment of their constitution, which guaranteed the right to life, as Frank was saying, of the unborn child. The overwhelming 66% yes vote means Irish parliamentarians will now introduce new abortion laws by the end of the year. But wasn't this referendum about much more than a woman's right to choose versus the right to life? On the line is Mary McAuliffe, Assistant Professor and Gender Specialist at University College Dublin. Welcome to the programme, Professor.
Hello, how are you?
So this vote saw a massive mobilisation which saw a Catholic, traditional conservative Ireland pitted against a modern, often progressive, sort of European one. How did you see it? How significant was it?
Well, I think this is a very significant vote and a very transformative vote. But it's not really a Catholic Ireland that was pitted against a modern European type nation. I think Ireland has been liberalising for a very, very long time. This has been a process that has been going on certainly since the 1990s. And of course, don't forget, we already liberalised our marriage laws in 2015 with another referendum when we became the first country in the world to put same-sex marriage into the Constitution. But certainly since the 1990s, Ireland is becoming a more secular, more liberal, and indeed more feminist society. So a lot of us who have been campaigning, who have been studying this, who are feminists indeed, were not surprised with the yes vote. We were surprised with the 66%, but most of us expected a yes vote last Friday.
Professor, what do you think this vote and its aftermath does to the position of the Catholic Church in the Republic? It used to be unassailable. It isn't anymore, is it?
No, it's not unassailable anymore. And I think it's a moment the Catholic Church can take time to think about its position within Irish society. Most Irish people are still either practicing or a la carte Catholics, maybe, or culturally Catholic. Our educational system is still very much under a Catholic ethos, as is aspects of our healthcare system. In the census, 80% and more of the people would consider themselves Catholic. So we're at a very interesting crossroads, whether we will just remain a culturally Catholic or become more secular country, and whether the Catholic Church becomes representative of a minority within the country or not. And
I was going to say, actually, I was going to ask you whether it might be an indicator that the Church is going to slide into long-term decline, or do you think there'll be a fight back, maybe triggered by the Pope's visit in August?
I think there can't be a fight back to the Church in the way it was. I think that will not work with very many people in Ireland. I think a lot of people actually in Ireland like this Pope. See this Pope as somebody who is probably representative of a new church, a more caring church. And I think that has the potential maybe to be the way the church in Ireland could go, to start thinking about being a more inclusive church, being a less dogmatic church. And I think you also have to look at the history of the church in Ireland. Prior to the 19th century, the Irish church was distant from Rome. It's really only in the last 150 years that we've become a Romanized church. We have a much longer history of a different type of Catholic church in Ireland, and perhaps there might be a looking back at the type of church practices we had then, and including them in more, a newer, more caring, more expansive, inclusive church.
Well, it's a moment for deep reflection. Professor Mary McAuliffe from University College Dublin, thank you very much for joining us. Now let's consider this quote from Pope John Paul II, who also went to Ireland many years ago. And in a speech in 2003, he asked, "What would Jesus Christ find if he returned?" And here's a quote: "Will he find faith in our countries, in this Europe of ancient tradition?" This is an open question which clearly reveals the depth and drama of one of the most serious challenges which our churches are called to face. Now, he said that 15 years ago, but how do things stand now? Let's put that to our guest, the writer and journalist Donu Kobara, who joins us via Skype. Greetings, Donu. Thank you very much for joining us. What do you make of that quote? And if Jesus Christ did come back and look at the Europe and Catholicism in it right now, particularly Western Europe, what do you think he would say?
Well, my guess is that he would be upset, disappointed, and so on. But that's the nature of the modern world, isn't it? I mean, I suppose that any spiritual leader from hundreds of years ago would find themselves completely surprised, disappointed by the state of play in Europe today.
What do you put that state of play down to? And when you consider, when you look across Western Europe in particular, you see that in Italy, 78% people say they're still Catholic, but a very tiny percentage of them perform an act of worship every single week. What do you think is happening, Donu?
I think that the world generally, and not just Europe, has become much more wedded to, shall we say, frivolity and style over substance.
Do you think that's because Catholics themselves have lost their way? I mean, led by the institutions which have allowed a lot of abuse and have not been accountable. Ordinary practicing Catholics maybe say, why should I sacrifice if the people who run the church are running it so badly?
Well, I'm as disappointed as anybody else about things like the sort of like paedophile scandals that have beset the church in countries like Ireland and beyond. I think you said earlier in your introductory remarks that some of these wounds that the Catholic Church is suffering from are largely self-inflicted. But I think what I've always said is the messenger is not as important as the message. You can have a bad crop of messengers in any context, but that doesn't change the fundamental value of the message. But you know, I'm schizophrenic. I totally understand the problems that modern Catholics face in terms of maintaining their faith and their commitment to regular worship. I'm not that great myself. I go to Mass maybe once or twice a month rather than every single week. I think the world has just become a lot more liberal. People are less frightened of the unknown. People are less respectful and deferential towards traditional institutions. That's my view. And I think, yes, if Jesus Christ came back today, he would be very sad, but perhaps he would also understand that the world is going through a massive modernization thrust. And perhaps we all need to, perhaps the church needs to make more effort to drag some of us back in.
All right, Donu Kobara, journalist, writer, broadcaster, thank you very much. Practicing Catholic as well. So what do you think back home watching this now? Here's a slice of how you've been reacting on Facebook. And we'll get our first message from Susie Kate, who says, the Catholic Church, authority in society. Nope, can't see the connection. Then we have Graban Makhmol, who says, the Catholic Church can no longer claim the people of Ireland's allegiance without it being questioned. And that is what this backlash from the church is really about. Power. The ability of the Catholic Church to demand positions of influence and control on Irish society is slipping. And something else we should add is the changing ethnic and cultural mix in Europe. Now, according to the Pew Research Centre, Europe's Christian population is expected to drop by around 100 million people, falling from 553 million in 2010 to 454 million people in 2050. That's from 74.5% to 65%. Meanwhile, Europe's Muslim population is predicted to rise from 43 million in 2010 to 71 million in 2050, an increase of 63%. So is this change a threat to the Christian church in Europe? I'm going to ask you that first of all. Frank, what do you think of those changing demographics?
I think we are being perhaps too ethnocentric here.
Okay.
Let us remember that Christianity is a religion born in the Middle East. It moved into the Roman Empire, so it came associated with Europe, but Christianity also spread into Africa, into Persia, into India, and as far as China.
Yes, but we're looking at where the Catholic Church stands in Western Europe. If you look at Western Europe, the countries where there are more Catholics than Protestants include Italy, Portugal, Ireland, Austria, France, Spain, Switzerland, Belgium and Germany, all these countries.
Europe has undergone a massive onslaught of secularism, of a reaction, deliberate attacks on the faith and on the church. And the culture of Europe has been partly deliberately corrupted by forces which wish to undermine and destroy
You say corrupted,
faith.
Tete, do you say liberated? What do you say? You're a Buddhist, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yes. What do you say?
I would say liberated, because there seems to be the flow
Look at Frank's face.
of the world. He must be mortified. But there seems to be of this flow of the world towards a sense of humanity. And the very stock in trade of the traditional Catholic Church has always been this very rigid, strict authority over people. Now, as long as you are delivering the needs of the people, people may accept that authority. But, for example, in America, the American Catholic Church has been impoverished because, I think back in 2007, they had to pay $615 million in out-of-court settlements over the abuses. Yes. In Australia, it went to £580 million sterling, equivalent of back in 2010 or so. So actually, the church is not only losing its authority, it's also losing money.
Right,
You say you're a Buddhist, but certainly I say the Dalai Lama is on record as having said that abortion contradicts the love which is due to all living beings.
Okay, well, I want Hafsa to come in. As a practicing Muslim, but also living here in Europe, although with North African roots, how do you see things? When you hear the Muslim population is going to increase significantly, do you feel good? Europe is going to be more open, broader, multi-faith. What do you think?
I don't know. I agree to a certain extent with Frank when he says there's been an onslaught on the secularists on religion. And I think that this is probably an opportunity actually for the Catholic Church to make a comeback. Because religion, irrespective of what faith you follow, it's a sort of like a paternal figure. It's a figure that is there to guide you. And there's been so much liberalism to a certain extent, and we've sort of strayed so much from the teachings of the faith, irrespective of which faith you're talking about, that opportunities such as this, or challenges such as this, which is very much a challenge for the Catholic Church, will force people to actually look back to the scriptures, look back to the teachings of the faith, and actually return to religion. So I don't think that there's a threat. The only threat would be for the church, or for any religious institution, to stay and remain and not do anything in order to invite back its flock to its institutions. But actually, this is a moment, in my view, as a challenge for the Catholic Church, and I don't think we should sort of bury the church right now, despite all the challenges that it's facing.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to you in a moment, Tete. Sure. Let's see what Twitter's been saying. A lot of people have been getting on and tweeting. The first one is from alias Eleanor, who says, the Catholic Church's loss of authority in Ireland and the identification of evangelicals in the US with the Republican Party and Trumpism are each in their own way suggestive of a crisis regarding the social role of religion. Then Thomas P. O'Dear Jr. says, yes, bad people are everywhere, but not even close to the majority of Catholic priests. In the history of humanity, the Catholic Church has been a positive influence. The Church can and will do better, but blanket statements that the Catholic Church is bad are just factually wrong. Remember, you too can join the debate on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram by using the handle DoublingDownTV. Tete, you wanted to come back.
Well, I mean, in the first place, what Reverend Kelly said, there are many schools of Buddhism. There's Hinayana, there's Mahayana. The Dalai Lama represents one school. But I think the problem lies in the way the church responds to the spoken needs of people, whether it's rigid or not. And it seems as if this current Pope is actually trying to rewrite the Book of Doctrine. I understand that he's the first one since 1333 who has had a formal report written against him. Call that a religious admonition.
He's getting a lot of resistance, isn't he?
A lot of resistance
in the Vatican and outside.
From within his church. And he's saying things like, well, actually, if a Catholic remarries, you can still offer in the sacrament. Yeah. Now, for many traditional old-school Catholics, this is completely going beyond the pale. And yet the emerging need of society is that the church must respond A, to its circumstantial, and B, to its spiritual needs. And the Catholic Church seems to be caught a bit like a hare in the headlights, not sure what to do.
Father Frank.
Francis is, in a way, a disruptor.
Yes.
Sometimes I compare him to Trump, although there are differences. The problem with Francis is that sometimes he confuses his flock.
Right.
The Catholic Church was always identified with clarity. Catholics knew
dogma.
What they believe. Dogma means doctrine, right teaching. But now, because he gives contradictory signals which seem to negate fundamental tenets of Catholicism, he confuses people. And a pastor, a shepherd who confuses his flock is not all that good.
Well, we're living in confused times, though. Maybe he's the right pope for the right time.
Confuse people.
And you see, it is difficult because if you kind of go further up the food chain in the Catholic system, they're actually having great difficulty now recruiting priests.
Yes.
Something like 20% of the dioceses in America don't have a resident priest.
Yes.
And this is to do with very practical issues like the matter of celibacy for priests. So these are practical things.
I want to bring Hafsa in. To what extent do you think there are lessons in what the Catholic Church is going through for other great religions, even those that are spreading very quickly, like Islam?
Well, actually, I think there's a lesson from Islam to teach Catholicism and all other Christian churches, because if you look at Islam, it's actually a hugely, in liberal terms, a very unpopular religion. It gets very, very bad press, yet if you go to any mosque on a Friday, it is full to the brim. It is packed. So there's clearly a message that is working in Islam, which is failing in Christianity. And I think what Muslims are achieving is actually remaining faithful to their scriptures. Where the Christians are actually constantly making concessions to the liberals, to the seculars, Muslims are not. And this is why Islam is today far more successful than Christianity.
Frank?
I think what ought to be said...
Within the European context.
Muslims in Europe very often come from communities which are more conservative. That is one reason why
in the initial generation,
support
in the first one or two generations.
Yes, but in the family, both of the family, even the second generation, tend to adhere more traditional. So that is, I think, one reason why Muslims are more. But I can see examples of Muslims who are also being corrupted and seduced by Western secularism.
Tete, what do you think?
You see, whichever way you go, I'm not going to pit one religion against another. In the end, whatever the religion is, it needs to appeal in a way in which the human being can willingly and voluntarily embrace that philosophy. Christianity is losing its active followers in
Western Europe, in the United States, but of course Latin America, Africa, no.
Yeah, well, again, when you go to Africa, you see these huge congregations of Catholics. But then in Africa, the Catholic Church is also involved in social and other programs which are of practical benefit to those people. Right now in the Congo, for example, without the Catholic Church there would be no opposition to the government. So that is a very practical activity that the Catholic Church is performing.
All right.
It's not able to perform these things or their equivalent in Europe. And so it's
briefly, I suppose you would say this about activist Muslims in Britain and in Western Europe.
Yes, undoubtedly. I mean, Muslims are more and more confident in their faith, and I think that shows because they're growing in numbers. I don't really believe in the argument of conservatism, because actually you're seeing that second, third generation Muslims are even more practicing than their parents. So it's not a question of coming from a conservative background. It's more to do with actually finding something that will guide you and actually people will refer to. Whereas there is lacking in certain other faiths, this is found in a lot of Muslim communities, and this is making it more successful.
And there we must land. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for this week. Thanks very much to my studio guests, Father Frank Gelly, Tete Kofi and Hafsa Kara Mustafa. Check out Doubling Down on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for news of next week's topic and to get your views in bright and early. Till then, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.